What's up, guys? David DeSell here, your host of the Business with the Boys podcast. And today I am doing a solo intro. Landon and I have had a tough time coordinating calendars. I'm currently up in Massachusetts, and Landon is on the road throughout the entire Midwest. So things are busy, but good busy. And we will be missing him for this intro. So, with that said, I want to dive in and introduce Hannah Demuth. And before we properly introduce Hannah, I just want to say thank you to Sarah Charlton. So, Sarah was a guest on our show. If you haven't yet checked out that episode, definitely go and take a listen to that. But Sarah introduced us to Hannah. So, without that, this episode wouldn't have happened. So, Sarah, thank you so much. And this episode was just really cool. It's a good story about someone who went from corporate America feeling burnt out and lacking purpose to really rediscovering themselves and getting into the entrepreneurial journey and having a lot of success along the way. So, to properly introduce Hannah, she is an internationally recognized somatic mentor who has dedicated or is dedicated to empowering individuals to reclaim their lives through mind body connection. And with a proven track record of helping clients overcome anxiety, depression, and trauma, Hannah's somatic approach unlocks the body's innate wisdom for lasting transformation. As the founder of High Vibrations Co., she offers holistic workshops, yoga, sound baths, and online programs designed to help people create more purpose, passion, and pleasure in their lives. And I think you'll really enjoy this conversation with Hannah. As high performing folks, most of which are the types of people listening to this podcast, we can oftentimes find ourselves succumbing to anxiety, depression, and just frankly struggling from time to time. So Hannah shares some ways in which you can combat that proactively, get through those things. So you're definitely going to want to tune into today's episode. Before we do so, just a quick thank you to the folks over at Landjet. And as a reminder, as a listener of this show, if you reach out to Landjet for transportation, you get a 10% discount when you mention business with the boys. So for those of you who may be unaware, Landjet reached out to us and wanted to sponsor the show. And Landon is good friends with the folks who own the location in Nebraska. And we thought it was a natural fit because as entrepreneurial folks ourselves, there can be a lot of time spent in driving from appointment to appointment, and oftentimes it turns into unproductive time. So we're now able to, through Landjet, utilize that time in a productive way by having someone drive us and us doing some work along the way. And never mind the social aspect as well, where you want to go to a game or an outing and you guys don't want to drive or coordinate, 3, 4, 5 cars, just get a Landjet. So again, if you reach out to Landjet and use the code BWTB for Business with the Boys, you get 10% off. But with that said, let's dive in and learn from Hannah. Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That mean you really playing with your life. I'm about to come and run it all back. Well, Hannah, my first question, which I didn't tee this up for you, but I've been curious ever since we logged on to this Zoom. I'd like to know if there's a story behind that cool saw on your wall behind you, because I don't usually see saws hung up unless they're in a garage and then it has writing on it. So can you help me understand that?
And for those listening, this is like an old school hand saw, not
Hand
like a
saw.
circular saw.
Yeah, the quote that I have on here, it says, "Life is tough, my darling, but so are you." And I never knew when I began my entrepreneur journey how tough it was going to be. And what really can help me is knowing that in advance. And so it's inevitable. Like, and we'll talk a little bit today about riding, learning how to ride the wave of life or learning how to navigate inevitably when shit hits the fan or when things fall apart. Because when I first started this journey, I knew that in my head, but actually living that out is a whole other Oprah show. And so that phrase has been a cornerstone of my entrepreneur journey for the last few years.
Well, given what we're going to talk through today, and I can't even read what's on there that far out, that is a perfect segue into the episode. So I'm glad that I was curious about that. So walk us through briefly what you do now to like, let's hook people in, but then we're going to go back to like how everything get like, what'd you do before this? But briefly speaking, what's your, lack of a better way to put it, sort of like elevator pitch when someone's like, what do you do?
Yeah, I teach people how to create more passion, pleasure, and purpose in their life. And how I do that is by building a mind body connection. Most of us have lived our entire lives doing the mental gymnastics and overthinking. I did that for years, and I had no idea that there was this inherent power, my intuition, my inner knowing, and teaching people how to connect those two together so they can live a life of purpose, pleasure, and passion is what I do.
Well, it's part of the reason why we were intrigued to have you on, and this all came about because of our mutual friend, Sarah Charlton. So thank you for the introduction. Sarah was on our podcast as well as entrepreneurs ourselves, as entrepreneurs who listen to this show, and as people who want to become entrepreneurs who listen to this show. Like, there's been plenty of times, and Landon, I'm sure you can attest, where um, you know, there's senses of feeling overwhelmed and anxiety and depression and all this type of stuff because there's so much going on in the entrepreneurial journey. And I can, speak for myself, but I've, resorted at times to smoking weed and drinking alcohol and vaping nicotine and like having these vices as like outlets to, relax. And those three things that I just mentioned do not serve me in any way, shape, or form, except for short term in that moment. So I'm particularly intrigued to have you on because this is something that it comes with the territory, those feelings and whatnot that you experience as an entrepreneur. But before we start unpacking it, bring us back. So you said, hey, I've dealt with all this stuff too. What did you do before starting High Vibrations?
Yeah, I call it my pre-COVID era. I don't know if you all remember this thing called COVID-19.
I try to forget.
We all try, right? We're like, talk about nicotine and talk about smoking and drinking. Woo! No, before COVID-19, I lived a whole past life in commercial real estate. So I worked as high-end property manager. I got my real estate license and worked specifically on landlord representation. So I would help landlords come into Tulsa and recruit talent to office space and climb the corporate ladder. And it's ironic because I was in college for marketing and I had a friend on vacation and he was like, hey, you're really good with people and you really enjoy talking. That's quite literally what he said. And he said, do you want to start leasing apartments for me? So as a senior in college, I started leasing apartments and that kind of started to spiral into developers recruiting me. And then I realized I didn't necessarily want to work for someone else. And the middle ground was getting my license and starting to be independent, but also starting to climb the corporate ladder. And I did that for 8 years. And I enjoyed the sense of connection and people. But I'm sure, like most of us, as you start to build a career, the inevitable stressors of life were insurmountable. And as someone who has a good family and a good job and a good education, I didn't know why I was still stressed and anxious because I was doing everything that society told me to do above and beyond and was working so hard and was doing all of the things, checking all of the boxes. And yet, just I was reaching it's called window of tolerance. I was reaching my window of tolerance every damn day and using some of the vices that we talked about to just soothe that stress and realizing that that felt like a band-aid over a big wound and started to do a little bit of discovery around like, surely I'm sure the two of you and those of you listening have said this to yourself, surely I can't be this stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed for the next 40 to 60 years of my professional career, right? Like I do this forever? Oh God. Like, okay, there's got to be something else, right? So that's what got me started.
And what was that? Like, did you have someone who helped you through that and then you decided to turn it into a bit? Like, I'm curious to know. So, like, there's people listening to this now who aren't yet at the point to where they own a business or they're doing anything entrepreneurial, but there's something that they're doing now that they could turn into a business. Walk us through that inflection and transitional moment from that corporate life, stressing out, to chilling out, for lack of a way to
Yeah.
put it, but with
Yeah.
a business and helping people do the same.
Yeah.
And I also, Hannah, just want to know like how you bridge the gap from real estate to
Coaching.
coaching,
Yeah.
consulting type
Yeah.
gigs. So yeah, if you can hammer those out, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So as someone, I have always been someone that just like jumps in and then figures it out later. And I've been someone who can really trust on my ability to work hard and to follow through. And so whenever I started doing my own inner work, I was asking myself, like, surely I can't be the only young professional who's feeling anxious and overwhelmed. And at that time, I was going to traditional talk therapy, which shout out talk therapy, that quite literally started to save my life. And it helped me get some really like logical tools of understanding my traumas and triggers, which I believe we all have traumas and triggers. And so for me to begin to realize, like, oh, it's not that I'm not working hard enough. Oh, it's not that I just need to make more money. It's the fact that I've got some stuff that happened to me and I need to learn, not need to, I have the opportunity to learn how to heal that part, not fix, not provide a solution, but genuinely learning how to solve the problem or the root of this. And then realizing I can't be the only one. Like, there's no way I'm the only one that's feeling this way. So I took my real estate Instagram and turned it into High Vibrations, which High Vibes is kind of my way of living, and started to facilitate sound healing, which is a guided meditation. Only because one day out of desperation, I typed into YouTube guided meditation for anxiety and I found a sound bath and was like, oh, moth to a light. And just again, realizing like, surely I can share some of these resources that have helped me change in a really grassroots, really organic way. And that momentum started to attract other people who really resonated, literally or metaphorically, with the work that I was doing. And, fast forward, here we are 3 years later. I started to build a little more infrastructure around the sustainability of my entrepreneurship journey. But I all started it out of hard work and realizing that I couldn't be the only one.
So did you start, Hannah, just kind of by exploration, obviously, but then like how did you monetize the
Yeah.
business model, right? Did you go to YouTube and start a YouTube channel? Was it, I mean, primarily online initially? Is it
Yeah. I
in
have,
person? Walk us through that.
yeah, I built my business exclusively on Instagram for the first like 2.5 years and selling. It's called high ticket one-on-one coaching. And so people working with me one-on-one through sessions. And I started to repeat myself a lot in my sessions. And I was like, okay, maybe I built a course. Maybe I build some curriculum with some of the most frequent things that I have people come to me with. I invested in a business coach, which if you are throwing spaghetti at the wall and sick of figuring out what sticks, wasting all of your time and energy, which are the most precious and finite resources, I tried that and then realized maybe I invest a little bit into my business and help build some framework. And business coaching, working with a mentor was the best and scariest and most expensive investment I had ever made. Putting that on my credit card was so scary, but I ended up paying my investment back originally within like a month or two. And that was the realization of like, oh shit, getting a little bit of support, getting a little bit of framework and some systems here can really help me versus y'all. I was just throwing spaghetti at the wall, like running in place and then wondering why I was so exhausted and so burnt out as I started my journey wanting to just help other people.
Well, thanks for the pre-plug on the coaching side of
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
yeah, that being said, any business owners out there looking for some coaching, holler at us.
Well, I would also say too, I want to just emphasize that point, Hannah, which is sometimes people are hesitant to spend $1,000, $5,000, $20,000, like whatever it is, whatever that amount is, that's scary, that's in front of you to hire a business coach. But they're taking their 10, 20, 30, however many years of experience, and they are basically distilling that down into an hour or two or three and shortcutting all the problems that you're going to make. So learn from their mistakes and pay to fast forward. And like you said, it's not a cost, it's an investment, and you pay that back immediately. And the ROI on that moving forward is something that is laughable when you look back at what you paid for that person's time and advice.
Well, and I think you're paying for it regardless, right? Whether you're paying for it through time or, frustrations, right? You're paying for it regardless. It may not be monetarily, but you're still paying for that. I mean, would you agree with that, Hannah? I mean, I think no matter what, nothing's free, right? So if you can take experience from, say, somebody like yourself, myself, David's, that has thousands of interactions in these conversations and can distill that into, one coaching session or a series of coaching sessions, why would you not just pay to hit the fast forward button?
Well, and I say the two of the things, which I love giving people authority to make their own decisions. But if we're making decisions out of fear, then whether that's investing in a coaching program or whether that's, in asking for, seed funding in your next round of your journey, like I say this to my clients, like, what if you could know with certainty that this was the best decision you could ever make for yourself? Like,
yeah.
And creating that sense of certainty, like that's really what I'm teaching you. I can give you the spreadsheets. We can work on sales and optimizations, and we're going to do all of that. But really what I'm going to do is teach you how to trust yourself.
It's a beautiful thing.
Matter, right? Like, and that's when people are like, oh, and having to have that conversation with people that have never maybe trusted themselves. And then on top of that, had a lot of trauma and wounds and just like money stories and scarcity on top of the cost of living. Like, it makes sense why you're nervous. That makes sense why this is a big decision. So like, what if we could know with certainty? That's step one. And then also realizing, like, sometimes my clients are like, okay, well, what's the guarantee? Right. And you might spend 5, 10, 20, $1,000 on this container, but it might be that you taking action, like that could be the result that you really need. Like taking that action intentionally, even when it's a little scary and overwhelming, that will pay dividends. Not the spreadsheets, not the program, not the curriculums, but you building trust in yourself, priceless, in my opinion. And me learning how to trust myself, that has been priceless for me.
I think it's funny because, I mean, what you just said, it's not a direct correlation, but it's so similar to the way I view so many people out there on, now this is more on the private client wealth management side of things that I do. I think people are so hesitant to just come and talk to not just me, anybody in my space, because they think, oh, it's going to cost a ton of money. I don't want to, it's scary to get financially naked and have somebody, look at all of my stuff. And what I try and explain to people is, number one, if I'm not saving you more than what you're paying me, whether that's in internal fees or tax planning or whatever, right? You're not going to work with me very long anyways. And we've got damn near 100% retention on the client side of things. So I think we're saving some people some money. And then it's like you said, the one thing I always guarantee them is peace of mind. Now it might not be good peace of mind, but it's peace of mind knowing that, hey, we need to do a little more to get to where you want goal wise, but empowering them and the people that have, identified them as being financially independent and have their financial freedom, the empowering that you give them and the burden you take off their shoulders is like, whoa. Right. I mean, how freeing is that? Like they almost glide out of here on a cloud when they see, oh, wow, I can actually do this and retire. And now I'm just going to work because I want to be there. I mean, you work on the psychological, mental side of things, that's so freeing for people. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Well, and getting to versus having to. I
Yep.
get to do this thing versus I have to do this thing. So many people don't even realize subconsciously that they're falling prey or victim to experiences in their life, which learning how to take responsibility, it is not easy. It can be easier, but it is not easy and it is very vulnerable. And we have a lot of, collectively, we have a lot of preconceived notions around vulnerability. But so much of this is learning how to create a sense of safety outside of just food, clothing, and shelter, but internal safety and autonomy. So you can start to make decisions from an embodied place versus that fear or not wanting to or feeling like you have to. That shift, that will change everything for anyone, I believe.
What does your typical client look like? Is it a
Yeah.
business owner? Is it an executive? Like, kind of paint that picture of the typical avatar, if there's someone typical.
Yeah, high functioning, successful, overachieving people who have a really strong baseline around what's working, what's not working. They've gone to talk therapy or they have a lot of awareness around just the things that aren't working in their lives. And they have tried things like yoga or cold plunges, or they've read a book or listened to a podcast and are starting to realize that there is more than just setting goals and writing affirmations, but there are some internal things that feel a little sticky, and they've tried some traditional measures, and not that they haven't seen progress, but on their journey they've gotten halfway or three
Mm.
quarters of the way or started to dip their toe into it, and they're looking for something deeper, they're looking for something more, and they're looking for really practical strategies that are easy to implement that will long term create sustainable success internally, right? Not more money, more clients. Like those things come as a byproduct. And my clients are the ones that want to do the work and are willing to invest time and energy into making long term success versus like, I want a session, I want one thing, I need a little temporary solution. They want the long term sustainable fix.
So you mentioned earlier that, hey, I found myself repeating myself and saying the same thing. So decided, why don't I document that? Maybe do a course. So I want to talk about that stuff, but I have a question that I'm going to try to articulate well. It makes sense in my head, and hopefully it makes sense as it comes out of my mouth. But so hopefully you understand what I'm asking. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on when someone, because I feel like there's a sort of a line or an inflection point where someone actually has a problem, for lack of a better way to put it, that can be solved, that's preventing them from moving forward. But there's also people that use it as a crutch and can have that victim mentality where it's like, oh, it's always something. It's all, and really it's just a built-in excuse. So like I find myself, um, when I come across people like that, that I can almost be dismissive of, like, that's just how they are. Like, what the heck? It's always something. It's just a victim mentality. But then wanting to also have like empathy of like, no, maybe it's actually legit. And I find myself at times where, it's like, no, there's actually something going on and I work through it. And there's other times where I catch myself using it as a crutch. I guess, I don't know if I'm making sense, but what are your thoughts on like someone who has the best of intentions of wanting to work through something versus someone who is just playing victim? Like, what, am I making sense? I'm trying to.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And so often I ask my clients or when I'm having conversations with people, what does that part of you need? Like the part of you that keeps using this maladaptive coping strategy, the part of you that keeps people pleasing or this imposter syndrome, or this part of you that like can't seem to follow through. What do they need? And I'm not talking more money. I'm not talking another partner. I'm not talking a better job, because all of that stuff is external, which we have zero control over. But maybe the part of you that's struggling with imposter syndrome, like maybe that part of you needs to learn how to be supported. And I'm talking like drinking water, eating good food, having some kind of guidance or accountability or community, right? Because victims don't have any control over what's happening to them. And when we continue to give away our power to something outside of ourselves, no wonder we keep repeating the same patterns and keep leaning on these coping strategies that we know they're not working, but we don't know how to do anything differently. And so asking, the invitation would be like quite literally sitting with yourself and being like, hey, okay, what do I need a deep breath? Do I need to stop checking my email for the night and like go eat some really good food and hang out with people that feel safe to me? And I can fix it tomorrow. I can worry about it later. But so often, just like taking a second and checking in with yourself, resourcing yourself is the best investment you'll ever make. And it starts with for me, I think asking that question and then giving yourself some time. Because if anything like me, I want the answer right away and I want all 3 steps and I want them mapped out perfectly. Or I just want someone to tell me what to do, when really realizing like, hey, if I sit and ask myself that question and then give myself the space to wait for an answer, that is really building trust within yourself. And that is what I believe it's all about.
Gotcha. Now, what about, so you mentioned, as I teed up a moment ago, that there's common themes that you help people through, and probably makes sense to, and perhaps you have done this already, as you alluded to, which is document that stuff, turn it into sort of a course of sorts. What are those common themes? So if I'm listening to this, right, and I find myself and consider myself a high performing person that works their butt off, that's highly successful, but there's days where I'm feeling blah. Maybe I'm anxious. Maybe I'm depressed or have symptoms of depression. Maybe, I'm dealing with some sort of trauma that kind of resurfaces, over and over again. Like, I'm sure everyone's situation is different, but I'm also sure that everyone's situation rhymes to a degree. Like, what are some of those themes or things that they can like implement to feel better?
Yeah, I think 2 of the most common themes I see with successful entrepreneurs, one is imposter syndrome, right? Like you put on this front or there's a part of you that really feels like you can do it, but right under the surface, what's really there is a limiting belief. And typically a limiting belief is a negative I am statement. So I'm not really capable enough. I'm not educated enough. I'm not hardworking enough. I don't really know what I'm doing. And that limiting belief is actually the one driving the show, right? And so learning how to, again, resource and support the part of you that feels like a fake, that feels like a fraud, and limiting our imposter syndrome, like that seems to be the most common theme that I see with successful entrepreneurs, is feeling like they can't really do it. And learn.
So
Oh, go ahead.
So on that note, is it a matter of, so like when I first got into, let me share sort of an example that will tee up this question. So when I stopped being a financial advisor, got into consulting, I was working with some folks at the time. I was 27, 28, living at home with my dad, and I wasn't making any money. So I started, consulting for, people who were like 55 years old, making over $1 million a year, like somehow convinced them that I had some answers for them. Right. And one of my buddies was like, hey, no offense, which every time someone starts with that, there's something
No,
offensive
you're like,
immediately after.
yeah.
But he was like, what business do you have with, helping a 55-year-old person who clearly has more life experience and is making $1 million and you have no dollars. And it like imposter syndrome, like, hit me immediately. And then I thought about it and I was like, first of all, F you. Second of all, I was like, well, anyone can learn anything from anyone if they suppress their ego and have an open mind. And like that thought that I had, that realization helped me move past that imposter syndrome. So all that to say, you started off by saying, there's negative I am statements. So is it simply turning those into positive I am statements and affirmations, or how does someone work through imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome and also comparison, right? If we're comparing ourselves to someone or something outside of ourselves, and just because someone makes more money than you and just because someone is older than you does not mean that they have some answer. And so often for me, which I've had plenty of experiences like that, like, who are you to XYZ? And I realized that, okay, everyone's opinion is just a projection of their own insecurities or their own inner dialogue. And just because it's activating something in you, that is your responsibility to take control of your own inner narrative and be like, oh, wow, there's a part of me that kind of believes that to be true. And again, I ask myself, like, quite literally, sometimes for me to resource my own imposter syndrome is to write down every single country, every single state that I have helped a client in, right? It is to reread my mission statement, my vision statement, and my value statement and be like, I actually do know what I'm talking about. I actually do know to how to help people. And so for those of you who are listening, and if you're struggling with that inner narrative, that pesky inner critic, one, that's a part of you that's just trying to keep you safe and is just trying to like a semblance, some kind of control. And if you can, one, listen to it. It doesn't have to be true, but acknowledge it instead of projecting it or suppressing it. What you're doing is you're giving yourself control and permission. And maybe you have to sit down and write a list of your mission or your vision or your values and tethering yourself to your why. That is going to root you down quite literally into a sense of security and stability, because it's inevitable when people come up to you and say that kind of stuff, right? But it helps you build some resilience and a willingness to be uncomfortable, because entrepreneurship, it is uncomfortable at times, but that is what helps you build resilience. And to me, that's what this is really about.
I would argue that being an entrepreneur or a successful growing entrepreneur, you should be uncomfortable all the time,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
always say green and growing or ripe and rotting, right? And so you always want to be pushing the envelope, pushing the business forward. And if you're not, that's okay. But I would say you're probably going to want to exit that business and try and get your highest multiple at that point, because you're going to start going the other way. If not, the other thing I'd add is that I mean, obviously, I think all of us can relate to this on some level. I remember being young and starting this business. I would say for myself, the way you frame it, it probably was a little imposter syndrome, but I always just use any negative self-doubt stuff as a motivator, right?
Mm.
So I just wanted to immerse myself in the business, educate myself as much as possible. And I think the reality is you've got to spend those 10,000 hours and get those at bats before you really are comfortable or confident. You're always going to have doubters of people that don't do business with you. That's fine. That's great. But I think if you can try and speed up exponentially the amount of time to become quote unquote a professional in your field and get those at bats, that's kind of the approach that I took. Was, at the time I was young and single, and I could work 16, 18 hours a day and didn't have to answer to anybody. So that's what I did. Right. So I think that's another takeaway is, if you can channel that and use it to be a motivator, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes fear is a great motivator.
Yeah, I had a lot of beginner's luck when I first started my coaching business as far as like profit and revenue, and it just seemed a little easy. And then I had that moment of like, oh, I've got to get my 10,000 hours in, and I have to have a lot of objections, a lot of people not answering, sending a lot of messages, hosting a lot of events. Like, I have to put in my work, and knowing that that hard work that the willingness to be uncomfortable, the resilience, and like the tenacity to keep going, that to me is success. Because in the beginning of my business, success was 10K months or followers on social media or like a certain number of cash flow in my business. And I realized that that's all external. And if I can learn how to create a sense of work ethic, not by someone else's standards, but by Hannah's standards, and like create some systems from that place, success, wherever that's success. And so wherever that takes me, whether it is, a client that pays in full, or a podcast interview like this, or just having coffee with somebody and really inspiring them, like that to me is abundance. That to me is success. And trusting that by working hard and continually showing up for my mission and my vision or my business, like, because there are no shortcuts. And even if you get a coach and a mentor and someone that guides you, like you're still going to have to put in that work. And I think that we collectively in this entrepreneurship journey keep getting all these like ads and these social media pushes, like, I'm going to teach you how to make this in this many days. And you might get that framework and you might get that systems, but you still have to put in work and time. And it is going to take a lot longer than anyone tells you it's going to. And that's the whole point.
Yeah, I think when you
no
hire a coach or somebody to help you on your journey, right? I always say I'm willing to pay for people's failures, right? Because I want the experience of what not to do, and I'm willing to pay for that. And I remember hiring a coach early on, and one of the best things that I ever did, right? I mean, we just got laser focused on things, and I'm the type that if you tell me I can't do something, I'm like, watch this, right? So, just having somebody accountable, and to me, monetary stuff doesn't, I mean, it's nice to have money now. It certainly makes life easier, but to me, the most freeing thing for me on this entrepreneurial journey in the spot that I'm in now, and why I feel just so at ease at all times, is my ability to say no. Like if I don't want to work with somebody, I'm like, no, right? That would have never happened early on. I think David probably would attest to this too. Where we started, it was like, the old adage of anybody that could fog a mirror, you'd talk to. Now it's like, if I'm just not interested or don't care or invest in that person personally, I'm not interested in bringing them on as a client. Like I love my clients like family, and so that's pretty freeing when you can get to that point. And I know I feel completely unshackled in my life with that. The other thing I think, just from my experiences in the past, having a good partner, and my wife, she just makes me happy, and everything on the home front, I'm just like, she just kind of handles it. She lets me lead where I'm good at. I let her lead where she's good at. If you can get on the same page with your partner, I think that is a lot of freeing. It's pretty freeing as well.
Support,
Yep.
community.
It doesn't have to be a spouse either. I mean, it could just, right? It's just the relationships you put around yourself. If you're putting yourself, I mean, David's a perfect example. We knew each other a little bit from our prior firm. I don't know, what was it, 7-8 years later, we get, it's like just good people in your life that want the best for you and aren't, critical of your success or a hater on your success. They're genuinely happy to see where you're at. I mean, I used to be a shitbag, quite frankly. I mean, I was drunk, partied my ass off. Like, I think if you pulled 95% of my
Look
quote
at
unquote
those
friends in
those
college.
negative I am statements, Landon.
Well, I'm just being a realist.
He's like, they're
Pulled
true. They were
95.
true.
Yeah, I'll own those. Right? It was like I abused alcohol, everything else from after my dad died. It was like, I don't think anybody was betting on the come for Landon Troyer on the long term, right? But my closest friends always were there, and those are the ones that remain today.
That's so good. Thanks for that share. And I love that vulnerability, because I think, especially post-COVID, we all realize like, oh shit, we're all real people. And this is the other thing I will say, and I really would love if anyone who's listening remembers one thing, is that nobody has this figured out. We might have one more step, maybe the next step, kind of quasi like have an idea of it, but the idea that everyone else around you knows what they're doing and you are the only one that keeps messing up or keeps treading water, that is so toxic and so pervasive. And the only sense of uncertainty is between your ears. It's your own mental thoughts.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter anyways, right? And none of us are going to be remembered forever. It's right. We're just one person on a rock in the middle of a galaxy that eventually we're going to be dead and gone. So who gives a shit? I don't know. I don't give too many shits anymore, clearly. And it's like, I love people hard, but if like, if you don't like me, I'm good with it. I don't give a shit.
Well, to your point, Hannah, about no one has it figured out. Like I was I was amazed when I first got into consulting, and going back to the 55-year-old person example, um, where they were like, wow, that's great insight, or that's I never thought of that. It's like, what? And then that happened again and again and again. And then there were times where someone shared something with me and I was like, that's so simple. I never thought. And then it just further confirms that everyone's just figuring this shit out as they go.
Mhm.
I want to go back. You alluded to this. So like when I'm consulting and coaching for folks, one of the things I'll do is like when they're feeling like blah or like in a rut, I'm like, well, start like a gratitude folder, like screenshot your texts, screenshot your emails, screenshot the nice things that people say about you, and when you're feeling like crap, open up the folder and read through all that stuff.
Mhm.
And you had made mention of looking at the map about all the people and all the different cities and countries and whatnot that you've served, your mission and your vision. Um, can you unpack that a little bit more? Because I'm a big believer in reviewing your mission, your vision, and the nice things and accomplishments that people have shared with you or that you've accomplished yourself. If you could just chat about that a little bit more, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. So fear, one of the favorite acronyms I like to use is false evidence appearing to be real. And just because you think something does not mean that it is true. And so often, my work, my mental, working in the mental health field, a lot of the concepts that I teach can be a little esoteric, a little ethereal. And so, one thing I think I do such a great job of is making it practical, tactical. So, whether we create quite literally a list of all of the clients or all of the states that you've worked in, or a gratitude list of all of the really specific, measurable things to be grateful for, if we can start to create evidence and data, it only takes a little bit of time for your brain to start to be quite literally rewired, right? Into this place of like, oh, I do know what I'm doing. Oh, I have helped a lot of people. Oh, I do have value here, and other people and myself can see this. And so, the way that I work with clients, whether it is a gratitude list or just figuring out ways to get some different perspective, to get your headspace to start to shift, we're looking for that data. We're creating that evidence. And then, quite literally, you have a laundry list, right? Or a whole folder of ways to shift your mindset. And in the beginning, it's not necessarily easy, but once we start to create some momentum and cadence in a different direction, eventually it becomes second nature.
I'm smirking as you're sharing all that because I'm remembering a moment. And Landon, you'll remember this too. And my buddy Tim Lanza, uh, who's probably listening to this episode, will remember this. So we're recording this, was it in September? So back in February, my wife and I bought our first house, and previous to that, we were renting, and we outlaid a boatload of cash, and then the monthly nut for the mortgage compared to the rent was double what we were used to paying. And I started like getting cold feet before closing because I was like, what if every single client that I currently work with all cancel
Mhm.
at the same time, and I never get another client again? So to your point of fear and the acronym that you shared, I'm looking back, I'm smiling, I'm like, oh shit, like I fell victim to that thought process. And then Landon helped, Dan Allison helped, my dad helped, my wife helped, but then specifically my buddy Tim Lanza, he's like, since you started your business, has your income over a rolling 12-month period, month to month, it
Mhm,
may
mhm.
change, but over a
Sure.
rolling 12-month period, has it ever gone down? And I was like, no. He said, have you lost clients? Yes. Have you always gotten more clients? Yes. And he walked me through exactly what you just sort of, shared. And at the end of that, I was like, okay, word, I'm good. But it's funny, like having that realization in this moment of, oh shit, I experienced that same thing. And then through evidence to the contrary, I'm like, oh, all right, word, I'm good. But I needed that person and those people around me to remind me that that wasn't going to happen. It would have been not better is not the right word, but it would have been helpful if I had proactively documented that evidence of how things have grown. So yeah, just ironic that we're talking about that. And I think back to that moment, I'm like, oh yeah, I've thought that everyone would actually cancel all on the same day.
Totally. Well, and I think catastrophizing, worst case scenario thinking is a coping strategy that we do whenever we are feeling out of control. And it's totally normal. We all do it. And I think the really cool thing is like, just like what you did, and also acknowledging like, this might be one of the biggest decisions I've ever made financially, energetically, emotionally in my life. So it makes sense that my brain is like, oh shit, what if all of this falls apart? Like, that's a valid and normal feeling. Like, I'm going to acknowledge that part of myself. And instead of being like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I know it's not going to work. I know it's going to work out. I shouldn't be afraid. We don't should all over ourselves. Okay.
Yeah.
We acknowledge our emotions. We validate our experiences. And then we take intentional action in the direction of where we really want to go. And it sounds like you listened and you leveraged your community to get some support and validated your experience instead of dismissing, right? I don't know why I feel like this. Everything's going to be fine. I shouldn't be feeling this way. Like, and should equals shame, in my opinion. And that's probably a whole other conversation for another time. But acknowledging and validating ourselves is like the secret sauce is acknowledging how you feel or what you're thinking. Like, okay, I hear you thought, I hear you, and I'm going to choose to do something different.
It's interesting that I guess this may be a real life session right now, but the other thing that comes that comes to mind.
It's
So
really
like,
about David and what David's life, I'm
yeah,
seeing.
I just convinced people that I want stuff from to join the podcast and have a have a free session. No, but I think like that whole process that I went through just then, like that was probably a matter of like 4 days, not that long. But when I was in college and my parents got divorced, I was numb to that for a year and a half. Didn't phase me, right? I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Just suppress the fuck out of it. And then randomly, I remember it was such a shitty time. I wasn't drinking not at the time. I wasn't drinking that night. And so I dropped off my friends at the bar and it was like pouring out, or maybe it was snowing out. I forget, but like it was inclement weather and I had a 97 Volkswagen Passat at the time. Oh, it was snowing out because my door was frozen open, like the latch. So I'm on the highway holding the door closed. Okay. It's snowing out, it's freezing out. And then again, this is a year-ish after my parents got divorced. And I just broke down hysterically like I've never broken down before. But that took a year.
I believe it.
Because of the suppression, again, that you kind of alluded to, where you need to acknowledge it, feel it, but work through it and take action. I did none of that. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't feel shit. I went out and got a tattoo instead. And I was like, bring on the pain. And then I just, it broke me.
Right.
It was so,
well, and
what's that all about?
no, I mean, think about this. I tell my clients all the time. I mean, as men, you've been conditioned to project or suppress your emotions, and emotions are synonymous with feeling weak. And there is nothing that you as men you don't want other than to be weak. And I think we collectively are starting to unravel that narrative. But as women, we'll cry. I'll cry at the drop of a hat. But being angry or like taking action, like, oh, no, just someone else tell me how to do this. I'm going to just keep swimming in my ocean of emotion instead of actually taking change. And so I think, to your point, whenever we're projecting things or suppressing things, eventually your emotions, it's just energy in motion, is going to come out. It could be a year later, it could be 20 years later. But instead, we can acknowledge and start to process some of this big stuff. And so processing doesn't have to be like journal prompts and taking the weekend off and not doing anything and like having a little, ceremony. It can be taking action or simply acknowledging, like, oh, yeah, this is big. And I'm going to just acknowledge it versus I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm going to just keep working and ignoring myself. Um, don't get me started on like inflammation in the body and like where all of this stuff, if we keep holding on to it, where that goes. Yeah.
I think for me, like when I feel shitty or in a funk, one of the best things that I can do, and it doesn't have to be monetarily wise, but just like my dopamine hit for me is just like I love helping others. It might sound crazy to some, but I think those that truly know me, like I like making introductions. People say I can be prickly, whatever, but I like if I genuinely like somebody, like I just want to help them. And like I was watching a deal last night, this on Instagram, obviously, guy gives another guy 100 grand in cash. And the guy was currently homeless, trying to take care of his disabled daughter, but he'd asked him for some money. And the guy gave him money, even though he didn't have money to give. Next day, he finds him, gives him a bag of 100 grand. I'm like, that would be like
Ooh,
cool as shit, right? I want to be able to
yeah.
do that someday for somebody who's a good person, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, it could be something as simple as like if I'm having a bad day, I can call up Double D and just be like, yo, David, I got an intro for you for XYZ, right? That to me,
Were you having a
making
bad day
connections.
yesterday, Landon? Because you sent me an
No, I
intro.
was actually having I mean, I like doing that regardless, right? But if I'm intentional about getting out of that funk, sometimes for me, like I just need that dopamine hit of being like, all right, go brighten somebody else's day, right?
Yeah.
Like if everything has been raining shitty on you, at least I can be a bright spot in somebody's day. That makes me feel better about myself and where things are at.
Totally. Well, and making it not about me. Like for so long, I would just be like, oh, woe is me, and nothing is working out, and clients aren't signing, and rent is due, and there's no good guy at the time when I was single, no good guys out there, blah, 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 blah. And then I realized like, oh, okay, we're having a little pity party here and really being able to shift that energy. And I'm a big sister through Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Oklahoma. And you better bet every single time, like this past week, I'll share I had 4 clients that all signed and then said no, and for their own reasons. And I was like, okay, that's a little frustrating and annoying. And then I decided instead of making this about me, like I'm going to devote time to spend with my little sister. And every single time I pick her up and every single time I go do something with her, like her first pedicure, first time going to the zoo, mind you, she's in high school, right? Like buying her dance shoes, buying her a yoga mat so she can come to my yoga class. Like I drop her off and I just like cry every single time. I'm like, okay, Hannah, as the clients are going to come, contracts are going to sign, the speaking engagements will come as you're like shifting this energy and really investing into something bigger than you. And for me, it's the next generation.
Love
Well, it's
that.
amazing. It's amazing uh how accurate that is when Landon, when the people listening to this, like whenever you do something nice for someone else without the expectation of anything in return,
Mm.
you end up getting a lot back. In a good way, we've gone a little off the rails from the first thing of imposter syndrome. And all that conversation was productive, but I'm curious to sort of reel us back in. What's the second most common thing that you come across with helping people?
Comparison. You keep
Is
seeing
is a
everyone's
thief of joy.
oh, yeah. You keep seeing everyone else's highlight reel on LinkedIn about their big deal that they close, and you keep doing your cold calls or you're right, and you keep getting no's, or you like that comparison, it is the thief of joy. And we touched on it earlier, but like just because someone like being able to celebrate other people's success, for me, I am so inspired every single time I see someone and they're just like just really accomplishing what they really want, because I say to myself, if they can do it, I sure as hell can do it. Right. But why compare myself when I don't even know the full story? And I'm sure the two of you can relate. Like, I've met a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of people, and when you really talk to them, they will vent about all of the things that aren't working in their life. And you're like, oh, we're all collectively like
Yeah.
figuring out and navigating. Like, they might be a step or two ahead, but why am I comparing myself to someone else's like totally different chapter when that's not even, is that fair to me to do that?
That's
I
what
have.
terrifies me when you talk about future generation, Hannah,
Mm,
is having a 12-year-old daughter and like
mm.
one, I'm the asshole dad. She doesn't have TikTok. She doesn't have Snapchat. Because
You're like,
that's my
you
biggest
can have a
fear.
LinkedIn, Bradley.
Yeah,
You
Yeah.
can
yeah, yeah. You
start
can have a
marketing
LinkedIn or
your
text me. But I mean, is that not true? I mean, these kids, like, it's not even these kids, right? I mean, I think it's our generation as well. They're sitting there trying to keep up with the Joneses on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. And these people are the most miserable people on the planet. I will guarantee you, if you got down to it, they are the fakest, most miserable individuals on the planet, renting private jets to take pictures in front of, like doing stupid shit that doesn't matter. And
Totally.
all I ever hear about from the young generation is this influencer or that influencer. That I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I think it's can be great, views for good, but I hate what it is doing to kids and
Well, the
younger adolescents.
the detriment, and like, I didn't have any of those things growing up, and I tell people all that the time, like, comparing, like, if you're gonna compare yourself to somebody, or if you're gonna look up to somebody, let's get the full story so we can make a really like embodied decision, versus thinking that someone somewhere else has this figured out, because they don't. So far,
Yep.
everyone I have ever talked to at any point in their life, they all feel that same way. Like, we're all just trying to figure this out. And really, that comparison, like, I'm so grateful to hear you say that, setting those boundaries around your daughter, because that next generation, like, they will thank you. And we all had our parents, right, when they all set those boundaries for us. I'm like, why can't I do this? But I'm so grateful that my parents were a little bit more strict and really protective of me, because it saved me from so much heartbreak.
Yeah, when they sit there and just live for likes, that to me
Ugh,
is terrifying.
yeah.
Like terrifying. Just and it's bullshit, right? It's false sense of anything, right? It's like just go make the world a better place and let that be your story. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and to kind of go back to what we were saying around comparison, and for those of you listening, like, please do not ever determine your worth, your value, your impact based on how many people are liking or commenting or showing up to your event, because success is you doing it, not the likes and the shares and the followers and the retweets. Like, that is not, if you let that be your measuring stick, you will be like the carrot, or the rabbit chasing the carrot every single time, and it will leave you so empty and so exhausted. So if we can allow those things to just be the icing on the cake, and really allow the ingredients of, like, I have my clients switch, this is like a hot take. If you can define success, safety, and security for yourself, and I'm not talking food, clothing, and shelter, but if you can really define what those things are for you internally, regardless of how many clients are signing or how much you're making or how many likes you're getting, that is worth, that's invaluable. To me, it was invaluable. It was so invaluable.
There's a gentleman that Landon and I listen to. I'm not sure if you've come across him. He's a bit aggressive, but I love it. His name's Andy Frisella, and he hosts a podcast called the Real AF Podcast. And he's actually the guy you may have heard of, 75 Hard. He created 75 Hard. But one of the things he always says, which I believe, and in spirit of the name of your company, High Vibration, I want to get your thoughts on this. So he says that when you compare yourself to someone else, or even worse, when you wish poorly upon someone who's doing seemingly better than you, or
Mm.
like, oh, it's because their family's wealthy or they got lucky or this or that. And you're kind of like shitting on the fact that they're doing better than you. What you're doing is you're telling God, you're telling the universe that you don't want that.
Or you don't feel good enough to get that.
So I'm curious. So keep going on that. I'm curious again in spirit of the name of your company, High Vibrations. Like you're putting that vibration out there.
Yeah.
How do you, I guess, try unpack that for
Yeah.
me? Your thoughts.
So, I think the spiritual new age healing woo woo world can get a very bad rap. But if we look down at science, science shows us that every single thing is energy. And our physical bodies, if you were to look down at the tiniest little cell, atoms, you are made out of energy. And if you ever walked into a room and it just feels off, or maybe you've met someone and you're like, actually, like we really connected. And like that is an energetic or a vibrational match. And emotions are energy in motion. And so if you're sitting there and you're judging, or you are like shaming, or you are projecting really negative emotions, really heavy emotions, I don't know what the chart is called, but there's a chart that maps out pretty much all of our core emotions and the vibrational frequency that scientifically we now know. Like love is the highest frequency, shame and guilt is the lowest. And so if we're constantly projecting really light, low vibrational energy or emotions, which create our thoughts, which create our actions, it's like, no wonder nothing is working out. No wonder we're staying stuck and spiraling. And so learning how to have a higher vibration or a higher frequency, and even asking yourself, like, if I'm really spiraling in this heavy stuff, what do I need to do to shift my energy? Right. And we haven't really talked a lot about nervous system and regulating your nervous system, but your nervous system is a primal function. It runs on autopilot. Our ancestors used it to keep themselves safe from saber-toothed tigers. And so we now know, again, with a lot of science and research that shows that getting out of survival mode, right, that burnout, that perpetual fight or flight, being able to re regulate our nervous system. And so we can learn how to shift that energy into a space of rest and digest, and creating, it's called your baseline, creating a baseline of safety and stability for yourself. That is rewiring your nervous system. That is shifting your mindset. That is repatterning your processes. And that shift out of the fight or flight or freeze or fawn, into a place of rest and digest helps you energetically, emotionally, physically, and mentally every single time. And that goes for every single person on the entire plane.
Do you read, listen, follow to Dr. Joe Dispenza?
Oh, don't even get me started on Joe. That's my
Okay,
boy. That's my boy.
because the emotions, energy in motion, the thoughts become all that stuff. And I love his analogy of like you can rewire the neural pathways in your brain. It's sort of like a ski mountain. At the end of the day, there's a bunch of lines. You can rewire them in such a way to where it's like a fresh snowfall and create new paths, new neural pathways. But yeah, a lot of the lingo that you're sharing, I'm like, that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. And I love Dr. Joe Dispenza. So what you're sharing is resonating with me in a great way. And he has a number of good books that I've read that are probably worth reviewing. But what I like about it, which is what you're emphasizing, Hannah, is that this isn't woo wooey. It's there's science that backs it. So I'm glad that you brought, because sometimes people can get lost talking about this stuff up in the clouds. But the reality is that there's research that backs all this shit up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell my clients this all the time. The next time you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed or dysregulated or angry or stressed or taking something really personal, practically, tactically, taking a slow, deep breath has been proven to regulate your nervous system. and getting your brain, getting your body out of that fight or flight, out of that like reactionary state is the best thing, the most powerful thing you can do. And again, I think Joe Dispenza is a fantastic resource, but we're showing that we are a spirit, we are a soul having a human experience. And this human experience sometimes is a little messy and it's inevitable. And if we can learn how to protect our inner peace, like for a long time, I didn't know that living a place or a life that was peaceful and happy and abundant was like even possible. I thought you just like were like keeping up with the Joneses and just working harder and just getting to the next thing. And then no wonder I was so anxious and burnt out. And when I realized like I deserve to feel peaceful, I deserve to feel happy, and I deserve to have some ways to protect that peace versus just freely giving it away and always operating from a deficit. Learning how to regulate my nervous system was like the first step of that, and learning again those slow deep breaths. Take a couple of those before you get on the call and want to chew someone out, or play on the horn or whatever that looks like for you. Give yourself the runway, friend. Give yourself some bandwidth, like before you keep reaching your window of tolerance and then wondering why you're so burnt out all the time.
I think I need to probably practice that a little bit because I run a little hot sometimes.
And I take a deep breath, y'all, with like a big old sigh in my car sometimes. And I do that to make making sounds. It's called toning. Make a sound with a sigh. Like let that shit go. Cause if you're not, that it's like still staying in you.
You mean it's not healthy to chase people down the interstate that cut you off and
Well, I've
try
done
and
that
get out and
I've done that a couple of times. I used to use the language about ripping someone's face off. And then I was like,
yeah.
wow, that's really violent and aggressive, Hannah. Like,
Aggressive.
ooh.
I sometimes I live there. I need to back that down a little bit. Thanks for that, Hannah.
I tell my client, I'm like, try it on for size. And we don't have to do it 10 out of 10 times.
What
But
do you
if
get to lose?
Yeah.
well,
You
and think
know?
about this. If you were to decrease the number of times that you did that, even by 10%, slowly and surely over the course of time, you're banking inner peace and happiness and like more runway. But it's not about not ever doing that again. It's just about having a little bit more balance of maybe not choosing to do it every single time.
This time, yeah. So transition from Dr. Joe Dispenza's book. One of the questions that we ask all of our guests as a way to distill a reading list is a book that's had an impact on them. And the one that you chose is called Lighter by Young Pueblo. Got that pronunciation. Why'd you pick that book? What's the impact that it had on you?
Yeah, so Young Pueblo is one of my favorite authors. His first book, or one of his first books that I found, Clarity and Connection. It's really short, like poems or just like short bits. And as someone who hasn't maybe read a whole book through all the way in a while, that was very applicable for me. And so when I started to find his work, it was more ideas to contemplate and to chew on. And so for me, it really helped shift my own inner landscape. And the book, Lighter, the top part, it says, let go of the past, connect with the present, and expand the future. And as someone who was anxious and depressed for a very long time, I started to realize through his teachings that anxiety is the fear of the future and depression is the worry of the past. But if we can be present, if we can connect to this present moment, like that's what this is really all about. And preparing for this podcast, there was a little snippet and it talks about like the art of letting go. And as a recovering people pleaser and control freak, this little snippet really resonated with me. And it just says, let go more than once. Let go when an old pattern wants to drag you back into the past. Let go when narratives run wild in your mind. Let go every single time you try to cause yourself extra trouble. For there is healing and repetition, and soon peace will feel familiar.
Love
Love
that.
that. Well, it's I don't know about you, but when I So like the whole idea of like depression is, worrying about the past, and anxiety is worrying about the future, and you got to live in the present. Um, that's something that I need to constantly be reminded of. This isn't oh, you read this thing and you're good to go moving forward. Like everything that we've talked about today, which has been incredibly helpful, by the way. So thank you. Is it's a constant part of your life that you need to work on. You don't go through a coaching program and you're fixed. It's no, now you have the tools at your disposal to use on a go forward basis, to do sort of what I referenced in a couple of my stories, which is take something that I dealt with for a year and shrink it down to 4 days, in
Yeah.
terms of working through. So it's good to hear that reminder, because there's times recently, earlier this year, where I felt depressed or I felt anxious, and turned to, vices that don't serve me. So to remember or remind myself, and be reminded by others like yourself,
Mm.
to live in the present is something that I know, but I need to be reminded of.
No, absolutely. And the present moment, it's a gift. And the really beautiful thing is I healing, growing, like living, there's no it's not when I get to this place, when I get to this place, when I get to this place. Because if you keep putting your happiness or your success into this thing that's in the future, like you are really robbing yourself of the gift of right here and right now. And the only thing that you can bet on with 100% certainty is this moment. And now, and now. And so if you are going to rob yourself of being present, which is the best gift, by worrying about something that hasn't even happened, like give yourself the opportunity to just be here right now, and to take a deep breath, and to orient yourself into the room, and use your senses to ground you down. And it's not about fixing or solving or doing. You're not a human doing. You're a human being. And there's something really beautiful about just simply being.
I need to
Boom.
remind my wife of that.
Done.
She's always
Done.
stressing about shit that could happen, and I'm like, babe, you're stressing about something that could happen.
Mm,
So stop.
mm, totally. Well, and I tell my clients all the time, I'm like, okay, sounds like you really care and you really, really, really want XYZ to happen. But let's kind of talk through, like, what if it doesn't? Like, we're going to figure it out. And we're going to, like, that worst case scenario thinking. I had to go through a couple of rounds of what if. What if this happened? What if? And then back to David's point earlier, like, actually, none of that stuff has ever happened or even came close. And even if it did, I have XYZ resources, like, and I'm pretty resourceful, and I might probably figure it out. Like, okay,
Well,
well,
what's
less scary.
there? I forget the name of it. I'm gonna call it reverse thinking, but I listened to Alex Hermosi podcast where he
Mm,
talks about this, and he's like, okay, assume the worst case scenario.
right. Assume the word.
Okay.
Yep.
Assume the worst case scenario, and then coach yourself, ask yourself, if that were to come true, what would you need to do or not do for that to come true? Okay. So if that equals the worst case scenario, all those things that you just listed out, how about you do the fucking opposite of that? And the result is the best case scenario. So you can actually use that negative thinking and that sort of uh, uh, scarce mentality that sometimes we have, and the fear that comes to us, and reframe that to say, okay, well, if that were to be the case, what would I do or not do? Okay, I probably wouldn't call these people. I probably wouldn't post the content. I probably wouldn't do this. Okay, so then just do all that.
Mm, so good.
Um, so, but Hannah, this has been wonderful. Sarah, I know you're listening to this
Shout out, Sarah.
episode,
You the
so thank
Shout
you.
out.
girl.
Appreciate the introduction. But Hannah, if folks are listening to this and they're like, I'm kind of in the rut, this sounds good, but I need some more personal help, or I just want to follow along with what you're doing, as I'm sure your content is very helpful as
Mhm.
well. Where can they connect with you? Where can they book a call? Where can they find you?
Yeah, if anything that I said at any point of this podcast is resonating with you, I would love the opportunity to get to know you more. I'm currently accepting clients. I have some space for my one-on-one cohort. So if you are someone who is looking and has already done some of this mindset work, but like layers of the onion, you know there's more, you know you want to go deeper, but you don't know how, and you're looking for really practical, easy, applicable tools to plug and play to get your life where you want it to go and make that mind body connection, I'm your girl. And so follow me on Instagram if you want to look at a lot of pictures of my dog. It's at High Vibrations Co. And I'm so incredibly excited to get to know you more and support you on your journey.
Awesome. Well, Hannah, we appreciate you and your time and insight. For everyone listening today, thank you for tuning in. And again, Sarah, thank you for the intro. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Who knew I would make it this far? They hated, they never believed me. Yeah, I would never drop the ball. I know I make it look easy. Yeah, Mayweather with the defense. I don't care what a critic got to say. I got them picking up the pieces. That to me, you really playing with your life. I'm about to